welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Charlotte Stebbing-Mills, and today I'm here with Lindsay Matthews, who's a brain performance coach. Hello, Lindsay. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
I'm excited for this conversation. Maybe a little bit more than you. I don't know. Obviously, you geek out on this brain performance stuff, obviously, a lot.
Yeah,
Something I'm really interested in for our clients, but also really selfishly for me as well. Like I'm
yeah,
really obsessed with this idea of that we can leverage ourselves so much more than what I think we already do. So I think this is going to be an interesting conversation.
yeah. Me too.
So for our listeners that don't know who you are, I would love
Yeah.
for them to get to know you a little bit. So to do that, I want to ask you the question. If you were an onion and we were to peel back the layers, what would we start to find?
Okay, I really like this question actually, because one thing I really struggle with when people say to me, they're like, "Oh, what do you do?" Because when you meet a lot of people, they go, "What do you do?" And I don't really do one thing. I do multiple things. So I would say, putting aside kind of like work and kind of who I am in that instance, I'd probably describe myself as like a multi-passionate creative person, but also with a little bit of like a science and data twist as well. Like I love geeking out on like science and numbers and things to back things up, and like that's kind of like the core. And I love kind of getting my hands in all different pies and understanding things from different perspectives and connecting the dots. Like that's kind of like I suppose like the characteristics. But in kind of like peeling back the onion and who I am and what I do, I actually worked in the tech space for the last 10 years. And then about 5 years back, I think it's about 5 years ago, I studied in holistic health and then had this kind of journey, my own personal journey, and then had this kind of moment where I was like, actually, I really want to dive into brain health. And I think this kind of more stemmed from the fact that my people in my family had kind of had like chronic mental health conditions as well. So I saw a lot of kind of pain and suffering, not like really bad pain and suffering, but enough to kind of, witness it and feel it as well. And I was like, I want to understand more about this. And I think why we're kind of in this world where there feels like there's a lot of like people are struggling and people aren't as happy as they used to be. So I think going back to your question, if I could kind of peel back the layers, I think there's like a real kind of core part of me that's like a big advocate for mental health. And I feel like that's a bit of a buzzword and people say it a lot, but there's a lot in my kind of like childhood and growing up that's kind of brought me to that place as well.
Mm.
Um, and then just I touched on the tech piece because although I still like, dib in and out of that, I actually really kind of see myself as like those two worlds merging together. I'm like this kind of techie science person, but I also like this kind of like creative, like free-spirited kind of person. So yeah.
I love everything about that. Like I really love that, you're doing this and kind of like leaning into brain performance and brain health as a result of like some of the origins that you've experienced. So I think then the quality of work just takes a whole different flavor and a different level of impact when it comes from a place like that. So I absolutely love that. But also it's interesting, right? Because like the tech side of things, the brain often gets like compared, doesn't it, to this like operating system. So
Yeah.
it fascinates me that actually like the brain is the bit you've homed in on when it comes from
Yeah.
like holistic health angle as well. Is there a connection there that you're aware of?
I don't think so. I don't know. Maybe it's because like there is a lot of science behind it. Like I really, and not many people know this, but I really want to move into studying neuroscience. I've studied the brain to a certain aspect, but neuroscience goes into a whole other level of it. And then when I think about technology and how that works, I mean, I'm kind of more in the creative side of technology, but I don't know. I feel like the worlds do connect. I'm not really sure like how. But I mean, if you think about like algorithms, right, and software, like our brain's like an algorithm. It works in a certain way, and it's like a learning machine. If we do something so much like habit stacking and things like that, we rewire our brain. So I suppose it's kind of the same
Yeah,
in some way. Yeah.
absolutely. I genuinely believe that. Like we've got these algorithms inside of our bodies and we choose what we're going to feed. Do we feed good
Yeah.
health and optimization, or do we feed it poor poor health, and we end up suffering as a result.
Yeah.
It's up to us, right? It's what we put in is what we get out, and I really genuinely believe that. So yeah, interesting. I think it's all connected in some way, shape, or form, like literally everything. So for sure, there's a connection. We'll bring you back on once you've done your neuroscience, see if there's any extra updates on that one.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be. It's like up to 6 years you can study it for. So
There you go.
yeah, there'll be loads.
Nice. All right. So let's dive in then. With you've already mentioned like mental health, right, in the
Yeah,
brain. Give me
yeah,
some understanding of how are those two actually correlated.
yeah. Okay. So, oh God, where do I start? So I'm going to kind of go back to like what we kind of believe, okay, like about our brains as well. It's like we kind of believe that our brain is hardwired a certain way, or like I've heard people say this, they're like, oh, that's just, I'm just kind of born with these issues, or I can't get rid of these issues. And it's not true. Like we can change the way the chemicals in our brain work, like even through things like food, through movement in the body, through sleep, through the habits that we do daily. And I think this was discovered, and don't quote me on the year, but it was like sometime around like the 1940s. There was a neuroscientist. He was a Polish guy, and he actually discovered then the idea of neuroplasticity. So like we can change our brains. So I think kind of coming on to that mental health piece is like if someone says that they've got like depression or anxiety, like we tend to like label ourselves, or like, oh, I have ADHD. And it's like, actually, you have the symptoms of those mental health.
Yep.
I don't like calling them issues. It sounds really negative. Mental health concerns. But that's not who you are, and you can change that as well, and you can do things. I'll give you an example, and you will probably laugh at this because this is actually true. And I told someone the other day and they literally burst out laughing. Like I had a panic attack once from having an orange juice because there was so much, like there was obviously other things going on in my life at the time, and I was quite an anxious person. This is like about 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm really sensitive to like high amounts of sugar or caffeine. Like I don't drink coffee. And I had this orange juice, and I was like, I need to get out of this cafe now. Like I'm literally about to have a panic attack. I had to just go for a drive and just calm myself down. So that is obviously an extreme, like having a panic attack from orange juice. But we can dictate what we put into our bodies and how we manage the physical body to help with the mental state and the brain.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, absolutely. And I think a distinction that I make in there as well is the difference between the mind and the brain. Like our mind is very good at attaching meanings to things. And that's where we find our sense of identity, right? So if I am saying I am a depressed person, or I am anxious, or I am stressed, actually, like you said, it's not who you are, it's an experience that you're having. And actually, our experience lives within the chemicals in our body, it lives within the ecosystem of our body. And that's the kind of the function that I see our brain taking. Are there any little like other nuances around kind of the difference between the mind and the brain that's important for us to know? Or does that kind of
Well, the mind is like air and the brain is a physical organ, like it's physical. So, and I think this is like what people forget. We look after our physical bodies. Like people want to lose weight, they want to look good. We can be quite vain sometimes, more vanity. But we look after our physical body because we see it. We look in the mirror every day and we're like, oh, my hips are a bit bigger now, my bum's a bit bigger. But actually, like, have we thought about what's going on in our brain and how the physical element of that looks?
Yeah.
So it's like some really crazy like brain scans when I was studying to understand like how things that we're doing and we're putting in our bodies affects the physical state of our brain. So yeah, I'd say that's like one of the core differences. But yeah, it's all like I always say it's like the brain is like the hardware. It's like your Mac computer, and then your mind is like all the software and the apps running within it.
Nice.
So you need to look after the hardware so that the software can run as well.
Such a techie metaphor, that.
It is, it really is.
I love
it.
All right, cool. So what are some of the other misconceptions then? So you mentioned one there is that we're almost stuck with what we've got and we can't change it. The truth is neuroplasticity exists and we're able to shape our lives and our being in the way that we want. What other misconceptions are there?
This is an interesting one because I really link food and the brain. Like, I think as I studied in like holistic health and nutrition, and that's kind of where my journey started, and then it went on to brain health. And I've seen a lot of changes in my mental state through the power of nutrition. And I think that, and this kind of touches on my last point around like how we look after the physical body and then we forget about our brains. But I think a misconception is that we need to feed our bodies and not our brains as well. So like our brains, like they use about 20 to 30% of our daily calorie intake. And like certain parts of the brain are just like, how do I put this? Are kind of tied to certain foods as well.
Yeah.
So for example, like if I want to focus more, if I want to like create more focus in my life, and this is like linked to your prefrontal cortex. So I would eat certain foods to help with focus.
Yep.
I'm not going to eat things that are really high in sugar. Are going to make me like jittery and you know, out of focus. And then things like carbohydrates, you know, there's this big thing like keto diet and like cut out carbs. Yes, it has its place. It serves a purpose, but our brain needs carbohydrates. Like there's emotional parts of our brain that need carbs, particularly like women as well. Like there's certain times of the month where we feel like we're craving carbs. It's because certain times of the month parts of our brain are chemically a little bit different with our hormones affecting it. So I think the misconception is like food is for our physical body, but actually I think I eat for my brain. I don't eat for my body. And then a byproduct of me eating for my brain is that I stay, you know, in a healthy way, and I don't have to worry about, you know, things like that. So yeah, I think that's a big misconception.
So what do you say to somebody who's listening to that and they're like, but you know, I just had a Krispy Kreme and now I feel really focused. Like I've got that little sugar buzz, right? And now it's like I want it. Like, and actually there's the potential illusion or the meaning making, right, of the mind that's saying, actually, no, that was good for me. So next time I'll do the same thing. And people do it with coffee, sugar, all sorts of things, right?
Yeah. You're right. There is a dopamine hit. I'm going to have a sugary donut. I'm going to have a coffee. I'm going to have something that's going to create focus. And again, it serves its place. Like don't get me wrong, there's times I do it. There's times I'm like, I'm sitting there and like, and I can't, you know, I can't focus on something, and like, I do need something to kind of help me, but I wouldn't use it as a long-term solution.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I wouldn't just constantly say, every time I need to focus, I need to eat a box of Krispy Kremes.
Imagine.
Definitely not. But like there's healthier ways to train it. So like it has a place at times. It's like, you know, I don't know, like airport food. Like I hate eating at the airport because the food is just crap at the airport. But it serves you know, it's a time and a place. I'm at the airport and there's nowhere else to eat and I'm going to eat there. So if there is like a time where you really need to focus, yes, you might want something to help with that. Maybe you want to have more of a good quality coffee to help with it versus a really sugary processed donut. There's like ways you can do that, but you could go for different things. Like you can have dark chocolate. That's a really good alternative to help you focus as well, and it's still got a bit of a, you know, sweetness to it. So yeah, I'm not saying not to do that, but I think it's just making sure that you don't have so much that you get this spike and then you get this like dip as well. Maybe you just have a little bit instead of eating you know,
and then getting hooked onto it, right? Like you said, it's not sustainable to do that in the time, place, context. Okay. But and I mean, I use the example of a Krispy Kreme, right? Because I'm human. But the coffee is the crutch that most people lean on, right? Particularly for focus and our attention. And to just survive the day in many cases as well. So I love that you shared that. Yeah, because the longevity piece becomes really important, right? How long can you sustain this for and actually show up in the way that you want to?
Yeah. And coffee's not bad. Like there's so many like studies that say that coffee's bad and coffee's not. But like coffee, I think you can have a healthy relationship with coffee depending on when you have it in the day, whether you have it with food, whether you don't, because it all affects your glucose levels and that affects your brain. So there's so many nuances to it. But if you're someone that loves coffee and you want to keep it in your life, then learn what those little nuances are and adapt to it, and you're not going to have these kind of like crashes then.
Exactly. And is it a coffee that you're having, or is it fancy ones that I can't pronounce from Starbucks that, you know, full of sugar? I don't know. I'm like you, I don't drink coffee, so I kind of like tune out to the frappuccino whatever's. But the same reason, right? Because I know how I respond to caffeine. But it's again knowing your body, knowing what it is you need and why. My other half, Jonathan, obviously our listeners know, and they might have heard this before maybe. is that back in the day, he used to have like so much coffee. He used to fill up those loyalty cards you get in a day.
Yeah.
Get his free coffee every single day without fail for a phase of his life. And obviously he was struggling with other things when it comes to his health, like chronic health issues and emotional issues and stuff. And he shared his story on this podcast before, so he wouldn't mind me sharing that. But his journey off of that crutch and starting to refuel himself in other ways, because he loves coffee as well. But I think he rekindled his love for it when he stopped drinking it like it was water. Right? Or absorb.
Well, there's a big piece in that, and I'm actually reading a really good book at the moment. I'm funny enough, I'm addicted to this book that's about addiction. But it's called Dopamine Nation, and it's talking about like how, have you read it?
Yes.
So you've read it, okay. Yeah, it's such a good book. So it's talking about how like I mean, I kind of knew this anyway, but the way it explains it is really, really good. But it's saying about how, like, you know, we become so immune to these things as well. And then what happens is when we step away from them, we actually create in some ways more pain than when before we went into kind of having that pleasure seeking, if we say. Like, we have these coffees because it feels good and we're, you know, experiencing that pleasure moment of like dopamine here, and then you stop taking it and then you have this like withdrawal and it feels extremely painful. So it's
and then we get stuck in a cycle, right? And we end up sort of like chasing those feelings. So I think it's a fascinating topic. Maybe we should have a conversation about Dopamine Nation at some point. But to bring it back to the brain specifically and performance, because I think there's some real issues that we're seeing in the world around the way that we can actually focus and our attention and things like that. And I want to ask you a bit more about that later, I think. But in your eyes, what is something about brain health or brain performance that you think isn't being talked about, and you're like, why is nobody talking about this?
What do I think nobody's talking about? I think that and this kind of goes back to what I said earlier about the mental health issues with, like, you know, people saying that they've got ADHD and they've got these mental health issues. I think we're not really considering what's around us as well. Like, and I talk about this in one of my trainings that I've done in corporates. So like how like the pace of technology and how that's increasing. Okay, it is briefly being spoken about how, like, you know, the use of social media is impacting our brains and so on. But I don't think it's going into the depths of how much it is actually impacting people as well. And more people are, you know, resorting to either medication that maybe they wouldn't have been on if these things wouldn't have happened. So I think there's a big role that technology is playing. And it's funny I'm saying this because I've worked in the tech space. But I think there's a role that it's playing that's impacting us way more than we think it is. And we're kind of giving the power away to these tech companies and saying that, oh, it's their fault because of the algorithms and because the way they're manipulating social media and it's impacting mental health. But I think also, like, there's a level of responsibility and like that we can take for how much we're using these tools and these platforms as well. And I don't think that is spoken about enough. I think so, like, pretty much I'd say everyone I know, the first thing they do in the morning is look at their phone. Like, that's one of the first things they're doing. But yet, and then there's like this increase in mental health problems and more people taking antidepressants. I don't know, I've just got like these like sort of like theories on it, and I think there's no coincidence that is what's happening.
It's not at all, is it? And I agree with you completely. There's a reason why our ability to communicate, concentrate as human beings is declining so rapidly. And I do think technology is playing a part. I think the amount of nutrition, the good quality nutrition that is available within society is also a contributing factor. It's a great book for anybody who wants to go a bit deeper onto this, just kind of understand it in a relatable way. Stolen Focus by Johan Harari, really good. It talks about like the power of play and how that can help us to bring back more focus as well into our productivity and just our ability to be creative. But one of the things that was really interesting is that, like, Google, was it Google or Facebook? I can't remember now, but basically there's a guy that literally created the function on the phone where it will automatically scroll down to the next page. So in the past, back in the day, we had to click next to go on to the next page. So if we was on Facebook or Instagram, we have to click next, and then it would give you a new bunch of stuff. But they created that bottomless scroll, right? So now you get stuck into that, and they designed that because it happens faster than our brain can actually make the decision to actually then switch off the phone. That we can't make the decision fast enough to say, no, I want to stop scrolling. But when we had the option to click next, it made us pause and ask ourselves, do I want to continue? But now they've taken that whole thing away, and our brain can't keep up now. The algorithm, the way it's designed, is literally faster than our brains can handle. And I think it becomes our responsibility to look behind the curtain and know this about the things that we're interacting with the most. Because as soon as I heard that, I was like, wow. Wow, like if I know somebody is purposely designing stuff to hijack my ability to concentrate, then like no, like I would never allow that. I just don't agree with it on every level. And so now it's more of a rebellion, and it's like, well, no, I'm not going to do it.
It's so interesting you say that. It's so interesting because kind of going into, I suppose this is where they are linked. If I think about like my, the 10 years I've worked in the kind of tech and digital space, one of my roles probably, I don't know, about 5, maybe more years ago, was around like A/B testing. So we used to do like version A of the website and version B of the website. And we would design it, and this still happens today, and I work with design teams today. We design things we are essentially like manipulating users into doing the things that we want them to achieve in that as well. That sounds really bad when I say it like that, but like we are designing in a way to help with business goals and to make it easier for users as well. But it's mad how I think it's come out on the Netflix series. What was the one with the social media?
Social Dilemma.
And everyone, when that came out, everyone was going mad about it. They're like, these companies, they're manipulating us. But I mean, they are just doing what they need to do in order to understand how their technology is working and what's, commercially benefiting them. But they're not considering sometimes the mental health of people. And I think there is a bit the responsibility from their side. But going back to my point and what you said earlier as well, it's like if they're not going to take responsibility, we need to look at how we can take responsibility and action.
I think it's really interesting because that idea of like technology creators manipulating people, it's not just that, right? It's been happening for years before the iPhone existed. Like in advertising, it's the same thing, playing on people's emotions. The thing is that now it's almost like it's crossed over now. We're living in this augmented reality, like we're connected to devices all the time, wearing rings that track our data. So now I'm like, but yeah, that's it. Now we're picking up our phones to see how many steps did we get? How well did I sleep last night? And we're forgetting to tune into our bodies. And that's again a danger I think that we're seeing. And I think this ties in really well to brain health, because we're becoming a bit reliant on those things as well. And we're not, or this is obviously a big generalization, but it's becoming harder to tune in because our concentration span is being reduced as well. So I would love to know from your perspective, what are some of the things somebody can do if they're listening to this and they're like, wow, I didn't realize that perhaps I have given my power away essentially, and my responsibility away to somebody else. I want to take it back. How do I do that? What does that look like for someone?
I think the first thing is like the measurement and like understanding where you are now with something. And I'm going to use screen time as an example, because that I think is one of the biggest things that's causing us distraction in this world. Like for me, I used to spend, no joke, 7 to 8 hours on my phone every day. And I say no joke, there's probably people that are going to watch this and they probably spend 7 to 8 hours. So there is zero judgment here, because I used to. And it was only, you need to bring awareness to that. And most people don't know how long they're actually spending on their devices. That was, by the way, just my phone. That wasn't including my laptop as well. So I was like, okay, if I'm spending that much time on it, how can I be more aware and conscious about the time that I am spending on it? I've got like a widget on the front of my phone now. So literally every time I look at my phone, I can see my screen time. So I have that awareness now. I'm like today, I think I've only spent like an hour on my phone today, which is amazing. And that's not to brag or anything, but I'm just kind of showing you the power of having that awareness of like, oh, okay, so There's that. So I think the first thing is like bringing the awareness to the problem. The second thing, and like this is when I think about particularly about focus and kind of distraction, like focus is like we need to have like a healthy balance of dopamine to be able to focus. If we have too much dopamine, we're going to be all like, ah, like crazy. If we have too low, we can go into like, you know, feeling like sad and, you know, whatever. And also to actually, let me go back to my point. So in order to do that, is like one of the things, this is one of my favorite facts, is like whatever we fuel our brain in the morning is what our brain craves throughout the day.
Yeah.
So if we're waking up and we are first thing you're doing, like bearing in mind, your brain when you wake up is in an alpha state, right? So it's not even like it's in this kind of dreamy state. It's actually like the best time to meditate or to do visualization because you're still in this dreamy kind of state. But in the first 5 minutes of waking up, people are looking at their phones. Their brains haven't even woken up yet. And we're like bombarding it with these millions of bits of information, and we're scrolling and we're scrolling and we're taking in everyone else's life before we've even observed, actually, how am I feeling today?
Yeah.
So I'd say one of the first things I would do is actually look at how can you remove your phone in the morning, or how can you remove anything that's going to give you like an unhealthy dopamine spike in the morning. That could be like looking at your phone, vaping. I don't know if anyone drinks when they first wake up in the morning. Maybe they do. Drinking first thing in the morning. Yeah, like sugar, anything that's going to kind of increase
emails, like even if it's not on your phone.
Checking emails, anything. So just allow time for your brain to actually wake up and do something that's going to be like a healthy dopamine hit. Like go outside, get some sunlight, just sit with yourself for 5 or 10 minutes. And it sometimes, I think people feel like it sounds all a bit woo-woo because everyone's online now and like, oh, you know, my morning routine, I'm going to meditate in the morning, I'm going to do this. And I think some people are getting a little bit sick of it, like it's kind of like rammed down their throats. But for me, I think the one hack would just be do anything, but just don't look at your phone first thing in the morning. Like at least for the first like 10, 15, 20 minutes. If you can avoid that, and like it might need training, and maybe the first day it's 5 minutes, the second day it's 10 minutes, and it takes time to retrain and rewire your brain to not like crave it.
Also, first thing in the morning as well is like actually our cortisol is quite high because that's one of the reasons we wake up in the morning, right? It's because our stress hormones start to become heightened so that we actually do wake up in the morning. So we then immediately layer that on with a coffee and a scroll or a coffee and your emails or WhatsApp. Right. And you're immediately going into that reactivity. Like your nervous system is already shot. Like straight away, you're already starting the day on the back foot. And I've seen that in my own self as well. And particularly if I don't sleep well, when I wake up in the morning, it's a lot easier for me to reach for my phone than it is for me to go and get that sunlight that I know that I need. So it's really all connected, isn't it? And with what you said about the first part, so the first part you said about awareness. I love that you've got a widget that's live telling you how much screen time. What's the name of that widget? I need that.
It's just on the iPhone. So my phone's out there at the moment, but
live. It gives you a live one, or do you like? Is it always?
It's just on the iPhone widget, so you can like I don't know how to do it off the top of my head. I'd have to like look at a phone, but it's the native kind of like iPhone view, and like you just go in to somewhere in the settings. I can't even remember. I think you hold your phone so the apps start wobbling. You know, like when they wobble, and then you click on, there's like a plus button, I think, at the top, and then you add widget, and then you can do screen time, and then you can just have it on. It just looks like a big app.
Yeah. So I know obviously you can check your screen time and you can track it, but I didn't know you could see it live, like clocking up throughout the day. That would be quite interesting to try that.
It changes by the minute. It's amazing.
Yeah. It's funny. Last year it was, and this is why when I started to really take it so seriously, I think so we spend a lot of time online for like work stuff and things, but even then that's I would say worse. I'd rather be looking at like you know, funny cat videos or something, right, than getting immediately into work mode, because then I get ideas and then I must get back to this person or that person and I'm already on the go. But I thought, right, I need to start paying more attention to this. So I was looking at my screen time and I was averaging around 6.5 hours, so not far off of where you were. And then I was like, for some reason that wasn't enough for me to say that's too much. And I was like, that's not okay. What's going on here? So I was like, right, I need to compound this and add this up. And I think I worked out it was something like I'd lost like 21 days of my entire year.
My God.
Up per day, like what you're I was like, that's unacceptable. And that was enough to make me think, you got to change it. Like, and I haven't gone back since, not to that extreme. It's definitely some days it's higher than others, naturally, but that just adding that up scared the life out of me. So anyone who's listening to this and you want a little exercise that might just give you that nudge over the fence to take action, go to your settings, find out your average usage, and then work out what that is over the course of a year and how many days you've lost. Because it's very powerful, super powerful.
You know what, just kind of like secondary to that as well, because I think sometimes we can have the information but it's still not enough for us to like to make a change. But I think if we kind of come to like this is kind of digressing a little bit, but when people like they want to achieve something and they're like, why am I not getting what I want, you know, why am I not meeting my goals or hit my goals or whatever. But by us constantly, and again, let's use the phone as an example, by us constantly rewarding ourselves so quickly through scrolling and seeing stuff online, we then that is rewiring our brain to think that everything is going to be rewarded quickly. So like dopamine, to have a healthy level of dopamine and to have that focus and to kind of go out and, you know, to achieve the things you want to achieve, we need to put in effort. And this is like a massive thing I think that's like happening in our society, is like we don't put in effort for anything anymore. Like in all areas of life, we just want everything now because social media has trained us to have everything now. And that's not how our brains work. Our brains, like if you think about to like caveman days, like, you know, the men going out to hunt the food or whatever, right? They need dopamine to get the motivation to go. But the effort required to get that food is a lot of effort. So they're naturally like slowly building up their dopamine levels, and then they're getting the reward, and then they're coming back and they're doing it again. But we're just constantly like dopamine. And then we're like, oh, well, why haven't I achieved what I want to achieve? Because we're not putting in the effort, because we expect everything right now.
Yeah. And I don't think that's digressing at all, because I think that's so relevant to performance, isn't it? And we need to combat whatever those challenges are for ourselves. Every single high performer believes that they can still do better. Even if they're the best at something, there's still that like that 10%, right? It's like, no, there's still that extra 10% there. And so, and it will be hidden in things like this. And it might not be the phone, right? We're using the phone as a lot as an example, but it might be something else.
Exactly.
And it can typically, another really common one is food, right? In the UAE, like in the summer months when you can barely go outside, unless you're really into like your, you know, your well-being and you're seeking out different kinds of like yoga sessions and breathwork sessions and these kinds of activities in the region, typically the fallback things that you do, you go out and eat, or you stay in and eat, or watch TV, or you shop, right? Yeah, exactly. Netflix is like the same as the phone in terms of the way they designed it so you stay hooked as well. So it's like so many things externally that could lead to our own sabotage, but we have to at some point put the brakes on, sort of wake up a little bit and be like, okay, well, what can I control? What do I want to be responsible for? If I really want that extra 10%, if I just want that extra 1%, like what can I leverage? And I think when you start to ask those questions, you're immediately taking responsibility. Even if you don't do it every day and it's not perfect, you're still moving in the right direction, and you're not being lost in the world of dopamine, right? And just being flooded by it from a place of instant gratification. Because I completely agree with you. I think it's really revealing itself, particularly in work environments, when it comes to this like self-entitled era of like the Gen Zs coming through, and like the opinions, and then the disconnection, the separation between different age groups, and expectations coming into certain positions, and what it really takes to build a business. The amount of entrepreneurs I've heard that are coming into business expecting quick results, they lose everything, they get investment, they end up owing people money in this region, and they just flee. You know, and then they've got all of this debt, they can never travel to this part of the world again, or the same thing's happening in another country and you're at complete rock bottom, and then we wonder why the suicide rates are so high. You know, because there's almost this, well, there's not almost, there is a disconnection between our ability to actually then understand what's going on inside of us, and then we talk about mental health, and then that's when it starts to lead into conversations around suicide on the extreme sides. So it's so interlinked that I wish, it's like seeing a car crash and you know it's happening and you can't stop it. That's how I feel, and it really winds me up a little bit. I can feel it in my body.
Yeah, you know what, and it's funny because like this might I'm just trying to figure out the best way to say this, like it's like there's so many people with like mental health issues now but I think there's kind of like this like helplessness around it, like, oh, and I kind of touched on this earlier, it's like this helplessness, but like, oh, I've got this and I've got that, and I think we're taking like we're giving so much power away as well in
Yeah.
this process. We're not really like taking a step back and looking around us and going, okay, what is going on,
Yeah.
and why am I experiencing this, why are so many more people experiencing this?
Yeah.
Like people are just accepted now if they get diagnosed with something, like, oh, okay, I've got this and I've got this, my doctor told me I've got this, so I've got to take this, and it's like we're not challenging anything. And I think this kind of comes back to that effort piece as well. There's too much effort to challenge it, so I just go with the easy option as well.
And what's also interesting though is actually the easy options don't have to always be the external interventions, right? The easy options can be that I'm just going to make a different choice in this moment. That is an easy option because it's a decision. Every behavior is a decision that's typically being obviously coming from like what we're conditioned to think and believe, right? And that fuels then our feelings, and then we just keep repeating that cycle. And so we have to pay attention to what was the thought that led to this decision that was made, or what was the emotion that fueled that thought, that fueled that emotion, that fueled that behavior. And if we can start to interrupt that for ourselves and be a bit reflective, I would even challenge anybody's listening to this, like, don't try and change anything, just observe yourself and reflect. You did a really cool thing actually, at the start of this, was it the start of this year? Oh my gosh, time is going fast. The challenge, there was a brain challenge that you did, and one of the things that you got us to do was the distraction diary.
Yes,
And
everything that's distracting you.
yeah, and that was really interesting for me, because I sort of would start writing it down. I'm like, why? Like, this is ridiculous. And then as soon as I saw it, I'm like, okay, like I just needed that awareness. I just needed to look at it, and that was it. I just needed to be really honest with myself and see, okay, what's going on here, and then I can actually intervene. So I would say that don't even try and change anything immediately. Just take stock and figure out what do you believe in and what do you want from life, and then go from there. Otherwise, like, we feel helpless.
Yeah, and I always say as well, like my favorite analogy is like the Google Map analogy. Like if you want to go to a place, like you always have a starting point. You always have A, and I want to get to B. And I think that's like no different in that applies to so many different areas. Like if you want to make a change with your mental health, or you want to be more focused, okay, well, like what am I doing now? Like why am I not focused now? Like do an analysis on it. Like that sounds very like sit down, do analysis, but like it takes 10-20 minutes and just write down the things like you said, like distracting you, or what's my screen time, or yeah,
exactly. So with all of this then, what are some of the ways that particularly related to the brain that you think somebody could start to, so maybe they've done the analysis and they're like, okay, now I see where the issues might be, what kind of like almost brain hacks can somebody lean on if focus and attention and their ability to make better decisions is something that's a priority for them? Where do they start?
So that's quite specific, which I'm glad you said, because it would be different for everyone. And there's actually, and people can go and do this, there's a health assessment which is on the Dr. Amen website. Sorry, a brain health assessment. And it's like a series maybe of like 20 or 30 questions. I can't remember exactly how many. And it will tell you your brain type. Now, everyone's brain is different as well. Like the way, the chemicals and the balance of the chemicals in our brain, it's all different. Like for me, I think we got the same brain type actually.
We did. Yeah.
I had brain type 1. Yeah. So like I think I had a brain type 6 before. I think it was brain type 6, which is like I had a low dopamine, so that's why I really struggled to focus. I was probably maybe feeling a bit sad and anxious at that point. It's a few years back, and then I'd done things to optimize my brain over the last couple of years, and now I've got it to brain type 1, which is actually one of the most kind of optimal brain types. So my ability to focus is not perfect, but it is like if I really do need to focus, I know what I need to do that, and it's much easier now. So kind of going back to your question, if we're kind of focusing, no pun intended, on like focus and distraction and things like that, that really comes like to the front of your brain, so your prefrontal cortex, and it's about having like that healthy level of dopamine. I feel like we've said that word a million times, but
that's because you're reading the book.
It is I'm reading the book. I feel like it's my favorite chemical of the brain as well. It's the most interesting.
It's much more fun talking about dopamine. I spend my days talking about cortisol an awful lot, so this is good.
Yeah. Well, it all interlinks. But so yeah, so in terms of dopamine, like there's the different things you can do for focus. Like obviously we've touched on some of them. So, you know, I think the number one hack is definitely the morning thing. Like start your day right. Like treat your brain right in the morning, at least. Like if you can for 30 minutes, just don't look at anything that's going to overstimulate your brain. And whether
Is
that be your
is
TV or
30
anything.
is 30 minutes the sweet spot, is it?
Yeah, well, yeah, it takes like they say like 20 to 30 minutes. Like, I mean, ideally it'd be like an hour really to kind of like fully get the full benefit from it. But I think like 20 to 30 minutes is like enough time for you to kind of wake up. Like that's when you should really kind of get out in sunlight as well within the first 20, 30 minutes of the day.
Yep.
Eating the right food for your brain. So like this is probably a really obvious one, but like avoiding unprocessed food. Like there's so much crap in our food these days. And then like particularly for focus, things like omega-3, like fish and things like that, like salmon, dark chocolate's really, really good, but it has to be like 70% cacao chocolate. Things like green tea still has a level of caffeine in it, but it's not going to give you like the shake sometimes like coffee does for some people.
It can give me the shake sometimes if I have
It.
two cups in a row. That's it. I'm done.
Yeah, so like things like green tea, if we're talking about like movement, so like exercise and things like that, like I find the exercise piece really interesting for the brain because everyone's brain type is different. Some people with certain brain types would be better to do more like athletic things or like swimming and dancing, whereas some people would be better doing more like yoga and walking. So I would say if you want to focus, what you don't want to do is go and do something really high intensity that's going to increase your stress levels. And I know you were just touching on the cortisol thing as well. So like having too much exposure to cortisol, which obviously we know cortisol doesn't mean that like, oh, it's just bad stress. It can be like doing a really intense workout. So the more cortisol we have, we can actually kill more of our brain cells through that as well. So doing things like just low impact, like walking, yoga. I'm not to say don't ever do a high intensity, but if you have a day where you know that you need to focus for a long period of time, you probably don't want to be going to doing a 90-minute CrossFit class in the morning, because also you're using so much of your energy as well, and your brain needs those calories.
That's so funny, and I'm laughing because yesterday we was on the stage in Dubai speaking at an event with somebody I'm doing some work with at the moment, and I met him in the morning. I'm like, "How are you? Like, how are you doing?" Because he seemed a bit more tired than usual. We'd been traveling, for he'd kind of flown in the night before, but he woke up and he went and did a 90-minute CrossFit class before he was about to go on stage and then deliver this master.
Oh no.
And I was like, ouch, because it's exactly what you just said there. That's exactly what was going on. It was a bit of brain fog. It was just feeling a little bit lower. It was almost a bit just not as on point as usual. Still amazing. It's not as sharp as you probably normally would be. Classic.
Yeah, and it's not to say that people can't do it. Like people can do those things and they can still go and show up and perform well. But if you want to have like an elevated performance, you want to be thinking about, okay, how can I preserve the energy for my brain? Like it's using your energy, it's using your calories, which as we know is energy. So yeah, and then the number one thing actually is sleep.
Yes, like, now we're talking.
Sleep
is like the biggest ROI ever.
It is, and you know, it's not about like even just the number of hours that you go to sleep. It's like the times that you're actually going to sleep as well, to make sure that your circadian rhythm is right. And I'm not going to go into the science behind that because honestly, it is a bit too complicated even for me. So like, even though have researched and studied it a bit, but that I think it's Why We Sleep by Matt Walker.
Matt Walker, yeah, it's a good book to start with.
Really, really, really good book. And Andrew Huberman, he talks about sleep a lot as well. But yeah, like I used to be one of these people that would be like, oh, sleep when you're dead. And like I would literally go to bed at 11 p.m. at night, 11:30. I'd wake up at 5, so I'd probably only have like just over 5 hours sleep because you always have like a bit of a wake time in the night. Yeah. And then I'd go to a HIIT session, and then I'd like be rushing to the office for like 8 o'clock. And I wondered why I was severely inflamed my physical body, why I was suffering anxiety, why I was getting panic attacks from orange juice. Exactly. I was so stressed out. So yeah, sleep number one. Sleep in the day.
Yeah, I mean or if you do any of those things, it's going to start to help, right? But
Yeah.
I have to say I'm a massive advocate for sleep. I really am, because it just, they say like everything's better after a good night's sleep, right? It's typically because it has the best knock-on effect to everything, like
Yeah.
to your attitude, to your emotional states, to your decision making, to how you physically feel, energy wise, absolutely everything. There's actually some research to link as well that the better your sleep is, the wealthier you are as well, which is interesting. So it really like just ticks every box for me, and it still boggles my mind when it doesn't become a priority. And I'm not perfect with sleep for sure. And there's times where I'll do all of the right things and I still struggle to get to sleep at night. I'll do the blue
Yeah.
light glasses, I'll have everything off. I would have trained in the morning versus in the evening. I would have made sure I've done my journaling before bed, or I'll read before bed or something like that. And I still might take a bit of time to get to sleep. So I share that because it might not always be wonderful. We're human beings. There's different things that will interfere. But there
Yeah.
are simple things that you can do to improve your sleep, like making sure that noise is reduced, making sure that your room is pitch black, making sure that
Yeah.
you are doing some kind of like relaxation before you go to bed. Like simple things. It doesn't have to be complex. But I love the fact that you've linked that to sleep. I actually saw something um, in something I was reading. It was actually in one of my courses. It was the stress, sleep and recovery coach course, and on
Mm.
it there was a video. I think it's on YouTube. I'll find it and I'll put it in the show notes. But basically there was an experiment done on a guy that was learning to drive, and not learning to drive, he could drive, but he was doing a test how long he could stay awake for whilst he was driving. And
Right.
they tested him for like 20 minutes on this course, and he fell asleep with his eyes open at least something like 70% of the time. But the camera was on him and you can see that his eyes are awake. He's functioning just like you and I now, but he was actually
Yeah.
having micro sleeps, and he
Oh
was
my
awake.
God.
His ability to be able to make decisions, fast thinking, obviously was very much compromised.
Yeah.
And obviously in this, obstacle course they put out for him, he killed whatever the teddy bear was that was supposed to be a person. But
Yeah.
it really highlighted the fact that we probably as human beings, we walk around all of the time, potentially at work, in our conversations, we're having these little micro sleeps and we don't even know it's happening. But that's because our
Yeah.
body and our brain is so desperate for recovery.
Yeah.
And if we're not paying attention to it, it just gets worsened, right? And it can
Yeah.
get as bad as being like blowing a breathalyzer and like you're drunk just from sleep deprivation, even if you haven't touched any alcohol. So like
Yeah.
and that's all happening in the brain and the chemistry, right?
Yeah.
It fascinates
You know
life.
what? Do you know what's really interesting about sleep and the brain, and the thing that I didn't realize until I studied it was around like the long-term effects
Yes.
on not sleeping. So like, I'm in my 30s. If I just continued to sleep 5 hours a night up until the age of, I don't know, 50, maybe even before that, 40s, 50s, like I can't remember the exact number, but the chances of having things like Alzheimer's, dementia,
Yep.
massive. I think it was like 60, 70%. Don't quote me on this. It was something really, it was high. It was over 50%. There's a
Yep.
significantly higher chance of having those diseases, early on in life. Like when you hear people now in their 50s or 60s and they're getting Alzheimer's and dementia, and you're like, even like my mum and dad, they forget things all the time.
Yep.
And I'm like, how are you forgetting that? But then maybe they just, there could be other reasons why. But I think we take for granted that we have this free tool to use
Yep.
to help not only our health now and our mental state now, but also in the future as well. So that's probably go back to your question earlier about what do we not consider enough and things like that. Is like we don't actually think about how treating our brain now is going to impact us in the future.
I love that you've mentioned that, because dementia is actually one of the most common health issues here in the Middle East. Dementia, diabetes, obesity seem to be like
Yeah.
the leading ones here, and obviously it correlates directly kind of globally as well. And
Yeah.
that these things, they're almost in the future for us. We feel so disconnected to them, but actually the future is on its way, and we're
Yeah.
laying the foundations for what that future can look like. And it's heartbreaking. Well, any health issue is heartbreaking, but dementia and Alzheimer is just like, ah, it's horrible. And but if we have the tools, right? And you're saying like sleep and nutrition are probably the two biggest wins. Is that what I'm hearing right from you?
I would say sleep, nutrition, and movement are like the three core things. Like when I think about how I like kind of manage my like routine and my daily health, it's like, okay, am I going to get 7 to 8 hours sleep? I really try and push for 8 now. Am I going to try and get 8 hours sleep? Am I going to be able to move in some way? Like I don't even do strenuous exercise anymore. I just do like an hour walking, and I do a bit of Pilates here and there and the odd bit of weight training, but not like, oh, I need to go 5 days a week religiously. I'm a bit more like loose on my kind of routine. And nutrition, like I'm human, I do eat sugar. I do like, go for a pizza, an Italian meal, whatever. But I try to like 80-90% of the time eat a nutrition, like, a whole foods diet, not processed.
Yeah.
So I'd say the key thing. But I'm going to say something actually, it just popped into my head a second ago, that fact that I think a lot of people maybe won't know is that when you touch on obesity and diabetes, which is like has huge impacts on the brain. And most people, I don't think would know this, that like the more weight that you carry on your body, as in actual fat on your body, the smaller your brain is.
Yeah,
And
interesting.
the smaller your brain is, when your brain starts to shrink, that's obviously when we're killing off brain cells and we start to get things like anxiety and depression and all these other things. So your weight, your physical body actually has a massive impact on how your brain functions as well. Not just from like, vanity perspective, but the way like the actual, fat around your organs and things like that. So
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because again, that then feeds into that emotional eating loop, doesn't it, as well, right? The brain is now compromised, so we're making decisions based on pure chemical and like nothing else. Like and we're feeding the monster essentially. We're feeding that need, that ghrelin, that hormone that's telling us we're hungry and we're not. And our brain doesn't have the capacity, literally, you're saying, to be able to do what it actually needs to do. That's really interesting. Okay, all right, Lindsay. So, what have I not asked you that you wish I had about this subject?
Oh, I don't know. What is one thing you haven't asked me? I can't think. It's like Friday evening. My brain's like
But you're
switched
right
off.
at the end of the week.
It's actually interesting. I'm doing a podcast tomorrow on the topic of relationships in the brain. So I would have said something like that, but I feel like there's a whole thing on that. So yeah, I don't know. No, brain performance. Yeah.
Talk to me about very quickly, very briefly, because I know we're pushing time now, is biohacking. Right.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on biohacking? First of all, how do you define it? What is biohacking? And
Yeah.
when, if ever, is it appropriate when we start to look at changes we're making for our brain health?
Yeah, so I would describe biohacking, if I had to describe it to a friend, I would say that it's a way in which you can optimize your human performance through natural alternatives.
Yep.
So like if I have a symptom of some sort, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, whatever it is, emotional, I'm not going to resort, the first thing I'm not going to do is go to a doctor and get prescribed medication. I'm going to look at ways in which I can heal that symptom. If I am neutral, like I don't have any symptoms, but I'm healthy, but I want to be even better, then then I'd see that as kind of like the ultimate biohacking as well. So that's like, okay, I'm at a baseline health now. So how do I like optimize my performance there? So I think that answers the first part of your question. What was the second part again? Sorry.
The second part was like, if and when do we start using it? But I think you kind of just touched on that.
Yeah, I think everyone, to be honest, I'm a bit biased. I think everyone should do it. Like, and it is a buzzword and it has been flying around for the last couple of years. But I just think biohacking isn't really biohacking. Biohacking is just how we should be living and how we probably did live 100 years ago.
Exactly. No,
we're just having this realization. We're like, I'll give you an example. Like you see a lot of these biohackers are like, having grass-fed beef and grass-fed butter and like, canola oils and this, and like when I think about it from a nutritional standpoint. But years ago, you look at our ancestors and that's what they were eating. They were eating grass-fed meat. They were eating off the farms. They were having like, cow's milk and I think we just always need to rewind.
I agree completely. I see biohacking as us reconnecting with our nature, right? But I do think there's a little bit of a it's I think again it comes back to a bit to a social media. I think it's becoming a bit kind of like glitz and glam. It's like you need the thing.
Yeah.
This thing, it's these blue light blocking glasses that you're going to need. It's this tracking ring that you're going to need to biohack your health. And actually, I think we just need to get the basics in check first. Just go to bed on time. Doesn't matter what, you don't have to wear a ring to do that. Just go to bed and wake up at the same time every day. Get enough of that sleep and you'll be just fine. So I think sometimes people almost like duped into the idea that it's going to be a quick fix. Biohacking means quick fix. And I think sometimes it's coming back to things that we've spoken about today, is just pausing, taking stock, having awareness about your actual life, your relationship to it, and what it is you want from life, and then start to maybe peel away some of the things that are not working for you and start to bring natural things that can help to lift you.
I think that what you said about blue light blockers, I think that kind of goes back to my point. You've kind of got like two personas. You've got like the persona one who's like, my health isn't great, I've got symptoms, how can I use biohacking? I would use biohacking through sleep, movement, nutrition, and look at like what's the bare basics that you can do to get to an optimal, like to a good level. If you're at that level, then start to introduce the more techie, the fun stuff, the infrared saunas, infrared lights, the blue light sun glasses, and all these other things, you know, like cold plunges. And I don't fully agree with them, to be honest, cold plunges. I think they have a time and a place. But yeah, so I think that's kind of what I mean. There's like two personas in biohacking.
Yeah. And the reason I wanted to highlight that is because there's a lot of people listening to this that might be thinking, oh, well, I've seen this thing. Is that the thing that I should be doing? And for you it might be, but for some of you it might not be. And I think that's the most important thing again, right? It's like understanding where are you, meet yourself where you are, and then elevate from there. Reach out, ask questions, try different things, right? Because cold plunges for some people is amazing, but again, give it context. Well, you know, where are you hormonally? Can you manage your stress? Do you understand how to breathe when you use cold therapy? Like there's so many other things that we need to understand, just like the brain, right? We need to understand what is our relationship to it and what is actually affecting it, and our relationship to things like technology, for sure. Obviously, you've mentioned.
I think my biggest tip for biohacking is listen to yourself, not listen to social media. That's the whole purpose, is to hack your biology. And the only person that truly understands your biology is you.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
Exactly.
Love that. Amazing. Lindsay, is there anything else you want to add to the conversation before you show our listeners where they can find you?
Nothing to add to the conversation. It's been great having this conversation. I love talking about this, so thank you for inviting me on. If anyone wants to reach out, ask any questions, you can find me on either LinkedIn, or LinkedIn is I am Lindsay Matthews, and Instagram is I am Lindsay with 2 underscores as well.
Amazing.
So yeah.
Super. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your brain wisdom with us. Enjoy your Friday evening and your weekend ahead and your podcast tomorrow. And I'm sure our listeners will see on your social media the episode that you referred to that you're recording around the relationship to brain and relationships. That sounds like a super interesting conversation. So maybe we can signpost our audience to that as well, since you've mentioned it. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode and you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode.
Then share it with a friend who you think might benefit.
Spread the word. That's how we're going to impact the world, by helping each other.
We appreciate you so much, and as always, unconditional love and wellness to you.